So, with the housekeeping out of the way, I do want to present our presenters today. And first, I'm going to start off with Steve Hendrick. He's from the Rotary Club of Green Bay. He is representing Rotary District 6220 in today's webinar. Steve joined Rotary back in 1990. He is currently the district governor for the district and has been serving as the Global Grant Chair since 2019. And Steve is a Paul Harris +3. And our primary speaker today is John Hine. John is from the Rotary Club of Milwaukee. He joined Rotary in 2002, and he's been serving as Global Grant Chair for Rotary District 6270 since 2018. And he too is a Paul Harris Fellow. So without any further ado, I am going to turn it over to John.
Waiting, okay. Okay, welcome, and I want to thank Don for what he's been able to do in putting together this webinar for us. This was originally to be a program at our conference in Oshkosh, and when that was canceled, we had to then decide how to present it in this fiscal year. I think we've gotten a very good response, and we are very much indebted to Don for his expertise in putting it on. So with that preface, let me begin where I think is the appropriate beginning, which is the mission of the Rotary Foundation, which is to enable Rotarians to advance world understanding, goodwill, and peace through the improvement of health, the support of education, and the alleviation of poverty. These are also the basic objectives of global grants: the improvement of health, the support of education, and the alleviation of poverty. As we get into this session, I'll give you a brief overview of what I intend to cover. The first is, what is a global grant? Then next, what are district designated funds? Then what must a club do to qualify? Then what types of projects can there be? What are the Rotary areas of focus? And then we'll dig in a little deeper on the actual project planning and what is the process for being able to apply for your district DDF and for a Rotary Global Grant. And then we'll close with identifying some of the resources that are available to you and to your district Global Grant Committee. And then as time permits, I'm going to talk a little bit about the lessons that I have learned from my experience with global grants and some coming developments. So I say, well, welcome to all those who are chatting and welcoming themselves. Let's start with the glossary. District designated funds is DDF. Now this glossary is very important, but you got to know what they stand for. So that's why I'm going through this now. Those who were in the seminar last year have heard this, but for those who weren't, this is important. So DDF is district designated funds, and we'll go into what that means. GG and DG are the grant types, the global grants and the district grants. We're going to be talking today about the global grants. The MOU is a memorandum of understanding. NGOs are non-governmental organizations such as the Red Cross. In global grants, important NGOs include Engineers Without Borders, with whom our district has worked extensively, and Doctors Without Borders. TRF is, of course, the Rotary Foundation. VTT is a term that will come up periodically, and that's a vocational training team. That's an acceptable use of DDF. It is not part of what today's seminar is to cover. WF is the Rotary International World Fund. And then, and I'm going to ask you about this later on, DRFC is the District Rotary Foundation Chair. In District 6270, that's Mary Beth Sizer. And in District 6220, that's Jack Frost. Okay then, what types of global grants are available? They are available for humanitarian projects, which are the projects that we'll be talking about today and which our district has been primarily involved. They require a minimum budget of $30,000, and the World Fund match is a minimum of $15,000 to a maximum of $200,000. I've never seen one in the $200,000 range, but most of the World Fund matches come within the $15,000 to $30,000 to $40,000 range, and I'll give you a sample of the simple and I think sweet spot for a global grant project later in the presentation. VTT, as we said, is the vocational training team. They too must be for a minimum of $30,000, and they involve sending people from your district to another area to help them learn the expertise that the visiting people have. And they've been used in our district in conjunction with the global grant in Kyrgyzstan. And I'll talk about that a little bit at the end if we have time. The next available area for DDF use is for global scholars. And there too, the minimum is $30,000 using both the DDF and the World Fund. So we would have $15,000 of DDF from our district and $15,000 for World Fund to reach that $30,000. Historically, our district 6270 has funded a VTT and a scholarship in alternate years, depending on available funds. District 6220 has funded scholarships in 4 of the past 5 years. Now, to the heart of what we're talking about, what are district designated funds? They consist of 1/2 of the funds donated to the Rotary Foundation by district clubs and individuals during the 4th previous year. These funds are the source of district grants and global grants in the current fiscal year. At the end of each 3-year period, 1/2 of that amount goes to the district. The other half goes to the World Fund, which is referred to as, quote, shared funds, close quote. And it is those shared funds that the Rotary International uses to match the district DDF and the club contributions in the global grant projects. Historically, Rotary Foundation used income from its funds to support its operations. So this makes it a rather unique organization because its costs of operations were absorbed by the income that it had from the contributions it received from its districts and members and then returned to those districts and members. In 2014, as interest rates began to fall, TRF determined that this investment income was not sufficient to cover operating costs. So it created a reserve fund for those years when the investment return does not cover operating costs. Effective July 1, 2015, global grant awards have been required to fund that reserve with 5% of cash contributions to the TRF. This is not the DDF that the district sends, but it's the cash contributions made by the clubs and by members contributing to the project. And this is to cover the costs associated with processing global grant funds by the Rotary Foundation. So here is the District 6270 budget for 2019 and 20. The DDF that was awarded our district was $113,789, which is 1/2 of the amount our clubs and our individuals contributed to the Rotary Foundation in 2016. We also have carry forward DDF of $37,801, which is just more material to the governor and the Rotary District Foundation chair because they are the ones who decide how much global grant we should be able to get out of that $113,789 DDF awarded to this district. Historically, the district grants take 1/2 of that amount, and the remainder is divided between global grants, scholarships, VTT, and any unused at the end of the year can be donated to the Polio Fund and other Rotary World operations. But the important number for our purposes, and we're late in the year, so for next year it'll be a comparable amount, is the $50,000 that is available for global grants emanating from our district. And now I'll turn to Steve, who will talk about his district's budget.
Okay, thanks, John, and welcome everybody. So for District 6220, our DDF award based on 2016 contributions was $62,421, as you see listed there. We have an awful lot of DDF carry forward of $137,247. We also received an estimated DDF from the endowment of about $1,500. And then we received additional district grant funds for $12,586. Now, one thing that's unique, and it took me some time to track this down, but back in 2012, 2013, the Anigo Club did a matching grant with Zimbabwe. And all of that money came out of the World Fund, DDF. So we still have that money from the Anigo Club to use for global grants. So for the budget for 2019-20, we had district grants of $44,545. That has been all spent, which leaves us $173,618 available for global grants. Now, included in that, we do, as John indicated earlier, we do fund a scholarship. So $15,000 of that 173 went to Global Scholar. And we've spent $4,500 for Brazilian Hospital and $3,000 for Bolivia Water and Sanitation. So as I mentioned, a lot of my club visits and area meetings, we do have a lot of global grant money to spend. And that's why I'm very pleased that we have a great turnout today. With that, I'll turn it back to you, John.
Okay. Thank you, Steve, and welcome in particular to those members of 6220 to learn about global grants. So, what must a club do to qualify for a global grant? In District 6220, we have a requirement that at least 2 Rotarians attend each year one of these global grant management seminars. District 6220 only requires 1 club Rotarian to attend those seminars, and I think that is the standard proposed by Rotary International. The more important thing is that each club must enter into an MOU, which is valid only for 1 year. Now, the MOU is a memorandum of understanding that commits the sponsoring club to the Rotary International rules and processes. It imposes significant responsibility on the sponsoring club. I'll go into that a little bit more later. It also imposes the responsibility for the use of the funds, regardless of who controls them. So if a project theoretically were to become underfunded, the sponsoring club would be responsible for coming up with that funding to be able to make it meet its budget. I've never seen that happen, but it's something that I think sponsoring clubs have to be aware of. So to qualify for a global grant, you should first appoint a member or a committee within your club to implement, manage, and maintain the club's qualification. That's the MOU. Then you should maintain a written financial plan, including accounts and records for items purchased, produced, or distributed. And that's a financial management plan that will get receipts for everything that is purchased with the proceeds of the grant, because at the end of the project, you are going to have to account for those expenditures and you're going to have to produce the receipts. So get in the front end a financial management plan. We are also responsible for assuring that all grant activities comply with local law. Now, that's a little intimidating, but it doesn't mean that you have to send somebody down to the country that you're working in to make sure that that's the case. It just means that you should impress upon the host country, and they should know about this if they're members, if they've been involved with global grants before, that all grant activities have to comply with local law. Then next, you have to adhere to specific bank account requirements, and these include the opening of a separate account for each global grant in which you are involved. And then, as I mentioned earlier, you have to adhere to all Rotary Foundation reporting requirements. These include interim reports while the project is underway and a final report that must be filed in order to the grant become closed. And as I will say in this presentation, we've had a few glitches this year with those reporting requirements. It's very important that you select a host club who's able to do those reporting requirements so that we're not in difficulty with Rotary International. Next, you must agree to cooperate in any Rotary Foundation review or audit. I know of only one audit that has been made in the course of my activity. It was one of our Guatemala projects, and it was a very complete audit, but we passed with flying colors, and it's nothing to be afraid of if you've maintained all of the records and complied with the other requirements. And then finally, you're obligated under the MOU to report to the district any potential or actual misuse or management of the funds. Now, that's a notice or knowledge standard. So if you have notice or knowledge of a potential or actual misuse, that reporting requirement, it comes into play, and you make the report to the district, which would be the then district governor. Again, I have never encountered that, but it is something to be aware of in the course of a pursuit and implementation of a global grant.
Okay, John, I think this would be a good time to take a short break and do a poll. So if you've minimized your chat window, please expand it out, and we have a little poll. So what is the source of DDF that districts can use for district and global grants? And give a few more seconds here to give people a chance to and I'm watching the numbers bounce a little bit, so I want to give everybody an opportunity to select. And I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So we had 6% of everybody thinking that it was district dues, 91% donations by clubs and individuals, and 1% saying district fundraisers. So, John, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay, thanks, Don. Congratulations to the 91%. Am I live? Yes, I am. Good. That is exactly correct, and it really is the most important point made in the first third of this seminar. This is why you're hearing your district leadership continually asking you to contribute to the Rotary Foundation, because those funds will come back to the district in the form of DDF to be used both for district grants and for global grants. So let's go on. The next area is the 6 areas of focus for global grants. And the first one is peace and conflict resolution. The second one is disease prevention and treatment. And our district has been involved in 2 global grants in that area. The most recent one is an India diabetes grant, which was sponsored by the Fond du Lac Morning Club. And then before that, there was a medical access grant in Kyrgyzstan that was sponsored by the Racine Club. And that is the global grant that had also the VTT training portion to it. The area that our district has been most involved in is water and sanitation. There have been 4 global grants in the last 4 years in that area, 3 through the Rotary Club of Milwaukee in Guatemala, working with Engineers Without Borders, and the 4th, a Bangladesh project sponsored by NINA. The next area is maternal and child health. We have not had any global grants in that area. I know of some midwife projects that have been funded below the global grant area, but that is an area of focus that the Rotary International will award a global grant for. The next is basic education and literacy. And the last is economic and community development. And there, our district has had 2 bridge projects sponsored by Rotary Club of Milwaukee and 1 microloan project in Haiti sponsored by Los Amigos Club in Milwaukee. So those are the areas of focus. They're broad. As we will talk later on, the projects emanate from a needs assessment done in the community. But if you start with this overall perspective on what it is you're looking for and then work with the host club to develop a grant, you will be in good standing with Rotary International. Recently, the Rotary Foundation made some changes in what global grants can be used for. We're not going to really talk about these today, but I think you should know about them. They include the constructing of low-cost shelters, and these are intended to be 5 to 50 single-story on donated land with a local government, and confirmation that there is no legal encumbrance or dispute involving the ownership of that land. It's a way of providing housing, the 50 to 50 unit housing in those communities. And the second is constructing simple schools of 2 or 3 classrooms. And the guidelines for each of these with sample applications are posted on the Rotary Foundation website, grants.rotary.org, which is a very important website to get background information for global grants. So if any of your clubs is interested in pursuing a global grant in those areas, we don't have prior experience with it, but we'd be happy to learn about it. Okay, let's then turn to project planning. And here the important thing is to locate and identify a host Rotary club within one of the areas of focus and conduct the community needs assessment. The Milwaukee Club has been very fortunate in affiliating with a club in Guatemala that was the primary club when Guatemala was part of the pilot project for Rotary International in developing global grants. So this club was very knowledgeable about putting together global grants and pursuing them and reporting on them. And we have gotten great success in being able to work with that local Rotary club. And I say that because it is important that the host club have the ability, excuse me, not only to assess and develop the project, but also to carry it through. It can carry it through with an NGO like Engineers Without Borders, but the reporting requirements are where the host club really comes into play. I'll say more about the community needs assessment as we move on. Next, you need to identify who's going to implement the project. And as I said, oftentimes with the Milwaukee projects, we've relied heavily on Engineers Without Borders, but your work in the host country will identify the experts within that country who have the ability to put it together. Then the next thing is for somebody to determine funding sources, and this is where your club comes into play in trying to decide how much you can get from the other clubs in your district and use of the leveraging provided by Rotary International. So what is a community needs assessment? It is a process of doing the assessment that helps you build the valuable relationships and encourages community members to participate in making and maintaining improvements. It must be conducted with the host club. And at the Rotary website, which is shown on this slide, and you may want to take this down because this, I think, is a very important tool that Rotary gives you. They have what are called the community assessment tools. These include tips for conducting any assessment, choosing the participants carefully, considering the community to ensure that you include a diverse cross-section of relevant groups, and consider yourself an outsider. Don't promise a project before you make a decision. Another assessment tool is the tips for hosting the community meeting. Identify the goals you hope to gain from this meeting. Select an accessible location at a convenient time. Promote the event throughout the community. Set and state ground rules, and be an active listener. Again, all of these are driven by the fact that it is the community that should control. The tips for designing a good survey include: explain why you're asking the questions, keep it short and simple, make sure your questions are unbiased, and conduct a small pilot of the survey before you go with it in full run. There are also tips for designing and conducting a good interview, and they too require that you identify your goals, identify your target respondents, practice, conduct some mock interviews before you go out and conduct the interviews, establish rapport with the interviewee, and again, be an active listener. And finally, there are tips for conducting the focus group. Select a location that's convenient, private, and comfortable. Arrange for another facilitator to record the focus group session or to take notes. Invite 6 to 12 participants. That's what Rotary International suggests is the optimum amount. Explain the purpose of the focus group. Introduce the main topics. Allow each person time to answer and listen to what they're saying, and then allow participants to respond to comments. So as you can see, all of these tools are really driven by having the community decide what it is that the project should be. We're not sitting in our conference rooms in Milwaukee and saying what they need in Hoyoba, Guatemala. We are going there, and we go there through Engineers Without Borders to be able to assess what it is that they need. And the most recent project that we've come up with, which I will talk about at the end of the presentation, is a prime example of that in process. Oh, I see that I've covered this already then. This is the tips for community assessment tools. The important part here is that the results of that community needs assessment must be included in the global grant application. So they will ask whether and when you had a community needs assessment. And we've had an application 2 years ago where there had been a community needs assessment, but it was 2 or 3 years old, and Rotary International did not accept that. And they required that the promoter, the sponsor, or the host company conduct another needs assessment to show that that need was still there. And this is a slide from the Rotary website, and I'm sorry it's so small, but I think it succinctly shows what it is I've been talking about. This is a kind of a graph on what a global grant should be. And it's up in the right-hand corner, it says start with the community. And then it also suggests that you encourage local ownership. They've got to be able to have local ownership of the project. And you'll find that this is a part of the sustainability. If you need to have some small charge for the water system and you don't have local ownership, you're not going to be able to generate that charge. And you have to provide training to the participants, the people who are going to be using it. And this is going to be one of the lessons learned at the end of this seminar. Rotary International encourages you to buy local, to not incur tariffs and fees, but to try to purchase your products there. Here too, our Guatemala projects were very benefited by the fact that members of that Guatemala club had access to the ports in Guatemala. So for the bridges that were built, they were able to use the cables from docks, from the local docks that were used to load and unload ships. The cables were in good condition, but they could no longer be used for that purpose. And that was a perfect, they may have been contributed, but purchased locally. Rotary International suggests that you find local funding. I found that to be very unusual. In fact, the typical grant by the local host club is $100 to $500. They don't have a lot of money, and I have not seen projects where you have a lot of funding coming from within the country. Most of the funding comes from within the United States. And then this is new for Rotary and is becoming more and more important. Measure your success. What are the outcomes that you are going to achieve? It's not only sustainability that Rotary is interested in, but now they're looking for measuring the success. So, Don, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. So we do have a question here. So it has reappeared in your chat window. So the question is, if you want to do a project in another country and you approach a possible host sponsor and ask them to provide a water well for its community, do you think the foundation will approve your project? Why or why not?
Okay, that's not an unusual project. First of all, you got to make sure that the community really, you've done the community assessment and they have said that they need the water well.
Yep.
And you have to have a program for the use of the water that's going to be generated by that well. And then you will need a hydrologic study to be able to satisfy Rotary International. Our district committee will just ask whether you've had one. We're not prepared to review it, but Rotary International will want to make sure that you've done a hydrologic study to make sure, this especially in a well, how deep you have to go and is it economical. So if you do all those things, yes, that can be part of a WASH program. We would also recommend that if you're bringing new water to the community, you guys should look at their sanitation, their wastewater treatments. And if they have none, perhaps add that to the project as well. That's a little easier to implement. And Rotary International is very pleased to have that as part of their WASH projects.
Okay. And so the poll question is still up and going. So you've heard some really good information from John as far as Rotary and WASH. For those of you that aren't familiar with that acronym, it's water and sanitation. So in the poll, there's 2 yeses and 1 no. So I'm going to give people another 20 seconds or so to look at, consider all of the information we've heard so far and select the appropriate answer.
Don, I do not have the question in my chat box.
For you, John, it's going to be in the poll question.
Okay. Gotcha.
Okay, and I'm going to end the poll and share the results for you. And 6% said yes because as the international sponsor, I know what they need. My club has built wells like this before. We know it will work. Whereas 93% of you said no, because as the international sponsor, we should conduct a community needs assessment with the host sponsor to determine the best way to help the community. So, John?
Am I on?
Yeah.
Congratulations to the 93%. That is exactly what Rotary International is trying to do. They don't want us, even if we have been successful in countries with drilling wells, they don't want us to tell them they need another well. That should come bottom up with the host club and the community needs assessment, and the application now will require that assessment be done and demonstrate the need.
Okay. Before you continue on with your presentation, John, there's been a lot of comments about wondering if we're going to get a copy of the slides later. I do want to give everybody the warm fuzzy that yes, we are going to make a PDF copy of these slides available with the links available at the end of the presentation. So.
Okay.
And so, John, back to you.
Thank you. Next. Okay. Now we're talking about additional project planning, and that involves developing a realistic budget for the project, creating a financial management plan, developing a project management timeline, creating a document retention plan, which lasts a minimum of 7 years. Now, those are all things that are required by Rotary International. The 7 years is to be held long enough so that if they audit, the information will be there. The recommendation that you create a contingency plan is not required by Rotary International, but it is urged, so that if there is something that goes awry, that you can perhaps pivot and not lose the project, but be able to have the contingency plan go into place. I can't think of one that we have had where we've had to go to the contingency plan, but it might include reducing the size of the usage of a water system, or modifying the size of the waste system that you're implementing, and things like that. But as I mentioned before, you have to create a separate bank account, no commingling of funds, and the accounting must track all income and expenses, and you will ultimately need a paper trail, which includes invoices, receipts, checks, credit card statements, and they recommend that you make copies of these. I think electronic copies are even better, so that the ink does not fade. So here's my favorite part of the presentation: what leverage is provided by global grant funding. The DDF for a global grant is matched 100% by the World Fund. That's the fund that got 50% of what members of your district and clubs of your district contributed 4 years ago. And that's the money that is then used to leverage the money that you're now committing with your DDF to go to a global grant. Cash contributions from Rotary clubs and from individuals are matched 50% by the World Fund. Non-Rotarian cash contributions can be matched if the donation is made through a Rotary club. But in that situation, the donor would not get recognition or Paul Harris recognition. The club would get the ability to get the 50% World Fund added to it. Funds cannot come from other Rotary grants. So here's a sample global grant budget. As I said before, the minimum is $30,000. This budget is for $40,000, with the clubs contributing $8,889. That sounds a little odd, but it includes the 5% administrative fee. It's assumed here that those funds are going to go through Rotary International to the project. You can save that 5% if you can contribute them directly by your club to the bank in the country in which the project is being administered. The World Fund will match the $8,889 by 1/2. And then if your district can contribute 1/3 of that, or $13,333, the World Fund will match that for $13,333, and you will have a $40,000 project. Those numbers, for me, the sweet spot of a global grant is between $40,000 and $45,000. If you had a $45,000 project and the club were to contribute $10,000 and World Fund contribute $5,000, which is 1/2 of that amount, and DDF could get to $15,000, and the World Fund would match that 100% for $15,000, you have a $45,000 project. And that, to me, is probably the easiest global grant to put together in terms of realistic funding, both on the part of individual clubs and on the part of the district, which has limited DDF.
Okay, John, we
Yes.
did receive a question that I think everybody kind of needs to hear the answer for that, and that is it gets back to the bank accounts. First part is, who sets up the bank account, the host club or the international club?
I wish I had Mary here. I'm not entirely certain. I think it's the host club. I think the bank is in the host country. I believe it's both. And Steve, if you're in the audience, you may be able to clarify this. I think your sponsoring club and collecting the funds sets up a separate account for the collection of those funds, and then disperses those funds to the project. You can't have a multi-project fund account in your club that is going to commingle the funds.
Yeah, John, this is Steve. A number of years ago, maybe 5 years ago, could be 6 already, District 6220 did a big international project for a Jahuli grant. I believe it was in India, to help women make scarves and things like that. So District 6220 set up the separate, distinct checking account. We collected the monies from all the various clubs, and then we dispersed that money to pay for the sewing machines. So in that case, I know we set up accounts at 6220 to collect that money and to pay the bills.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Does that answer the question?
I believe it does.
My understanding.
And then as far as related to that, is it a joint control between the host and the international and local host?
In our case, it was not. District 6220 had full control over that account. Now, we did have to provide information to the international host with regards to the bills that were paid so that they could complete the grant paperwork.
Okay.
And on the projects that I've been involved with, once the money is sent to the country, to the bank in the country, and the exchange ratio has taken place, we have no involvement in the distribution of those funds other than the reporting requirement.
Okay. I did also get a message from past District Governor Jeff Reed, who's also our district grants chair, and he said it depends on how the grant plan is structured. Either the host or the international club can open the account. It depends. And then Judith also did a reply to everybody in the chat session.
What was her reply? We've got a lot of expertise in this audience.
Right. Well, in her chat reply, she talked about all funds being sent to RI and had a specific example. I don't necessarily want to read what everybody can read in the chat window. Member in also talked about a project in Sierra Leone where separate account in Appleton.
Okay.
Well, we get to another nice breaking point. So I'm going to ask our next poll question. And the question is, what is the World Fund contribution for District DDF for a global grant? The choices are 50%, 75%, or 100%. And it's interesting to watch these answers come in real time and watch the bars bounce up and down. And we'll give some more while that's going on. Kind of tying back to our earlier conversation, John Townsend commented that he would assume that the RI Regional Grants Officer would be a valuable counsel for such detailed questions.
Absolutely. They become very much involved with the final approval of the application. And they're very helpful in setting up or in helping you fill out the original grant application.
Okay. Well, looks like the bars have settled down, so I'm going to end the poll and show the results. 50% said, 41% said 50%, 1% said 75%, and 57% said 100%.
Okay, Don, it appears I have to go back and clarify because I think this is a very important point. And the answer is 100% for district DDF, which are the funds that the district awards for the project. The 50% is for contributions from clubs and from members within the district. But the real leverage here comes from the district DDF, which in our district for this year was $50,000. And that means it's $100,000 of funds that are available for global grants. So the correct answer is for DDF that is administered through the district, which goes through the district global grant committee, gets recommended for approval by them to the district governor and the Rotary Foundation chair. and it is the Rotary Foundation Chair and District Governor who then sign off. And when they have signed off, those dollars are matched 100% by the Rotary Foundation. So I'm glad the question enabled me to clarify that.
So, and I kind of want to echo what I heard just to make sure that we do get this point across, because leveraging the district grant, World Fund is where the power of the foundation is at. So if we've got a project in XYZ location and a club kicks in $1,000, DDF kicks in $1,000, the World Fund's going to match dollar for dollar on the DDF and 50 cents on the dollar on the club. Is that correct?
Yes. And this is why the districts that have unused DDF are getting overtures from other districts to fund their projects, because the DDF is so valuable in the fundraising for a global grant project. Thank you. That's the slide that we're looking at. Anything else, Don? Or
that was. I think we wanted to make sure we got that cleared for everybody.
Right. Okay, so if you can put me back on the slide that no one can read.
Yes.
This is really a mop of what we just talked about, but it is a chart that I got from Rotary International, and the real purpose of my including it in the presentation is it demonstrates the 5% rule. The bold portion about in the top third of the slide has the Rotary Club ABC contributing $5,000 and the Rotary Club DEF contributing $5,000 directly to the project. The DEF does not have a 5% surcharge because they have not routed their funds through Rotary International. The ABC does have to pay a 5% surcharge because they have routed it through Rotary International. Now, there are advantages to routing it through Rotary International, but it's just something that you should be aware of in the fundraising portion of this calculation. Okay, next. Okay, now we're getting deeper down and talking about the process for a global grant application. And I'm assuming that everybody will want to have district DDF. And what you should do is go to your district website, both 6220 and 6270, and download the preliminary project information sheet. I will go through that with you shortly. You should complete that form and submit it to the District Global Grant Committee Chair in 6220. That's Steve at that email address. In 6270, it's me at that email address. The District Global Grant Committee will then evaluate the project, give recommendations, and ultimately authorize use of DDF, of district DDF for that project. And this can be a give and take. On the Haiti microloan project, I was quite involved in helping put that together. And so you should be able to feel free to contact your district global grant committee members, because we are here to help and guide you in putting together a global grant that will fulfill the requirements of Rotary International. So this is the global grant project information sheet. And I hope it's large enough on the screens. If you can largen it up a little bit, you can see, well, a little bit better. The key ones, I think, are the first one. In our district, you have to have 2 or more people attend this year's grant management seminar. This seminar qualifies for any request that's made for the 2020-2021 fiscal year. Then you have to include the name of the project and the description. And here we get to, has the needs assessment been done? By whom and when was it completed? We want to know early on that you have done that. And if you have not, we're going to send you back to the starting point and have it done. This is not often a problem. What area of focus does the project fit in? And then identify the name of the host club and the district and the amount that is funded by the host club. Rotary International strongly suggests that there be funding by the host club, but we found that host clubs do not have a lot of funding. And I think typically $100 to $500 is sufficient for a host club to contribute to a project. Rotary International will not be skeptical about that amount. Next, we need to know upfront what is the anticipated realistic cost of the project. And then we're looking for a preliminary budget, and our committee is getting more and more detailed on that preliminary budget because you have to put the budget, the anticipated budget, in the global grant application. And for us to be able to see how realistic that preliminary budget is makes it a lot easier for us to be able to assess and evaluate the request. Then next is how much DDF is being requested. And a rule of thumb is 1/3 of the amount of the project, not to exceed $15,000, although we recently had a project where the Global Grant Committee approved a $20,000 DDF for a $175,000 project. I'll be talking about that at the end of this seminar as well. Then identify the partnering clubs and potential partners for this project. You don't have to have all the funds committed at that point in time, but if you do have clubs that are committed, it's good to know that up front. And ultimately, Rotary International will want to know that who those clubs are, and you'll need to fill that out. Plus, if we're not certain, or if you have not fulfilled all the funding portions of the global grant, our committee will approve it conditioned upon completion of the funding. And we've had a situation where we required that completion within 6 months so that we know it's really on track, because we're committing DDF, which is a fairly scarce resource, and we don't want that to be committed and then unlikely to be used. So we do want to know who the funding clubs are. Then how many Rotarians will be involved and what will they do? That's a requirement of Rotary International. And how will the project be sustainable? And this is a very important part of the global grant application today, because we've had too many instances where wells were drilled and water was produced for a year or two, and then the pump broke and they couldn't replace parts, and it was not able to be used again. Sustainability is very important. Then finally, the name and contact of the person, the name of the contact for the project, the email address and phone number and area code. Our committee then will look at the preliminary project information sheet, and we're doing this now by email. When I feel that it is in a form to be prepared to be sent to the committee members, I'll send it by email to all of our committee members, ask for their input, and comments and questions will be handled by email, and then we will vote, and the majority vote is an authorization to submit it to the district governor and the district foundation chair for approval. Once you've got that approval, and you don't have to wait for that approval. In fact, we recommend that you do the online application concurrent with the preparation or the consideration of the application for local DDF. You go to the TRF website and get that application, begin to fill it out. It is interactive and easy to do, and you can save what you've done. and you get a global grant project number, and that is crucial because that is how we will follow and track your project from the beginning to the final release. The TRF staff will then review the project in detail, and if it meets the terms and conditions for global grants, they'll recommend acceptance and funding approval for the project. They will also recommend maybe some changes, and that's in the lessons that we have learned part of this. They can be pretty nitpicky in the questions that they're asking, but it's all with a good purpose, and they want to be able to help implement the project. And the district Global Grant Committee could also be there to help you in your dealings with Rotary International in being able to go through that process. So next is a video that, Don, I just push it now.
We do. There's some conversation that's been going on in the chat that I want to address. The first thread is talking about a minimum club contribution of 20%, and how, if you can kind of clarify what you meant by that earlier in your presentation.
Okay, that's 20% by the clubs and I think the DDF, so that they want to have a 20% of the entire. In fact, I think it may be 30% of the entire project is funded by the sponsoring club and its district, and by clubs within that district. You can aggregate, and I'll give examples of that at the end as well, as to where you get other clubs to be able to participate. It's not the individual club that has to come up with 20% of the amount of the project.
Okay, and another thread in the chat had to do with essentially trying to figure out what is acceptable for going into the budget for determining the total cost. For example, an NGO might be working with the host club and using some of their paid staff. What is the amount of that paid staff's involvement with the project can be put into the budget for a global grant?
I'm not aware of any project in which we have included funding for the Engineers Without Borders NGO that was participating in the project. So I would want to contact Rotary International and see whether that's an appropriate amount to include in that budget.
Okay, thank you. And I will start the video for us.
Global grants? My club only has 14 members. We do what we can right here. But a global grant project? Sorry, but we just don't have the horsepower.
As Rotarians, we have always been committed to doing good and connecting with our local communities. It is all too easy to forget that our organization has 1.2 million Rotarians living, working, and doing projects in nearly 200 countries worldwide.
Yeah, I think it's great that Rotarians are doing that sort of thing. But our little club could never make a difference in those remote corners of the world.
But you can. Without giving up our local community involvement, we can also experience the gratification of doing world service as well.
I've traveled quite a bit. Most of it has been for business. This is not business per se. This is service. There are needs greater than ours. This trip will leave me moved, no question about it.
Milwaukee has a large club and it has been funding small projects in central Guatemala for several years, but even they needed help. to do slightly larger projects. Teaming with clubs in Wauwatosa, Waukesha, West Allis, Madison West, Town Middleton, Mitchell Field, and the North Shore, and also the Vista Hermosa Club out of Guatemala City, and a new team member, the Huehuetenango Club. They are using global grants to help fund a water system and 3 pedestrian bridges connecting remote mountain villages separated by deep ravines and uncrossable rivers. For villagers who could neither send their kids to school nor get to a market, at times for a month or more, access to water and their village market every day has been only a dream. Meanwhile, Engineers Without Borders connected the engineering schools at UW-Milwaukee, Marquette, and MSOE to involve their students. As a class project, the engineering students designed the projects with EWB professional oversight and also get the opportunity to go on-site and bend rebar, mix concrete, and construct water systems of their own design while acquiring real-world experience. It is a complicated series of connections in the end, involving over 100 different people, but it is doable and it is being done. And you can be a part of a connection that will change people's lives for the better.
In the final analysis, we as Rotarians are not about bridges, chicken farms, or water systems. We are about people. Being a Rotarian, we get close to people. We are making a difference in people's lives.
Does anybody want to walk down there and try to walk it without the bridge?
Leave a legacy that will long outlast our life's daily distractions. Global grants with Rotary International. Get involved. We can do better.
And you're back, John.
Okay, thank you. That little rivulet that you saw the boys playing, crossing the stones, was in the bottom of that canyon and is probably 20 or 30 feet underwater during the rainy season. And the bridge that you saw at the end was the bridge, the suspension bridge that was built across by members of the community. They took those cables and started at the road end of it and through a human chain went down the hill and across the river and up the hill where finally they could get a device to enable them to put it. But there's a lot of labor that goes into this, and all that labor is contributed in the projects that we've been involved with in Guatemala by the villages in order for them to be able to have the project come to them. So let's go on. Let's talk about the resources that you can use, where to find or get help. The Rotary grants.rotary.org under My Rotary is a wonderful, wonderful resource to be able to learn about global grants. I recommend that you just go on it and go through it. They'll talk about the terms and conditions for Rotary Foundation grants. They have a guide to global grants. They have the discussion of the areas of focus and policy statements for each one. They have the community assessment tools that I've talked about before. On the district website, you can get the district MOU, and you can get a copy of the MOU that your club will have to sign in order to participate. The preliminary project information sheet is on our district website, and I believe on 6220 as well. And it identifies the members of our Global Grant Committee, who, as I say, are here to help you in putting together a viable global grant. The partners for this are Rotary clubs both in and out of the district. As indicated in the film, there are several of our projects where we have had multiple clubs that were involved. There are other community-based organizations that you will want to work with, especially in the needs assessment and getting them on board. There are the NGOs such as Engineers Without Borders and Doctors Without Borders. And again, go to myrotary.org to be able to get information showcasing of projects that have been done. There's an idea exchange. There's a discussion of the grants. And we also have on our district website a district showcase, which is not very complete, but we are hoping to beef it up. And then, of course, there's all social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, and other sites. Okay, now we're getting to the lessons that I have learned from our global grant projects. The first one I thought would be of interest to you was in that bridge project. It wasn't that one that you saw, it was the predecessor, where all we did was put together a grant, a request for the construction of the bridge. And the purpose was because the villagers on the other side, and it was a relatively small village, but they were absolutely cut off from civilization during the rainy season. They could not realistically cross that river. And we thought that that was a sufficient reason to be able to enable them to get to school and enable them to get to the cities. Rotary International came back and said, no, we want an economic development part of this project. We think that these are primarily maize farmers. Their principal crop is maize that they use themselves, not to sell to third parties, and they'll grow other vegetables, again, only for themselves. But it was Rotary International that suggested that why don't you have an agronomist come in and teach them how to grow cash crops so that they can take those crops to market and have a little income in their village. And it was a very good idea. And it's, I think, made the project a much more viable project and certainly of much greater interest to the community. The Guatemala Water and Sanitation Project was another example of where Rotary recommended a modification. It was simply, you saw in the film, the collection point where they were going to take water from a uphill spot on the river and fill those collection points and then have those points pipe the water into Hoyaba to augment their water supply. It had no sanitation component, and I don't know if you recall the film, but Hoyaba was far off in the distance there. It was about 5 or 10 miles away from this source of their water. But Rotary International wanted us to include a sanitation component, and that included bringing people who could teach the users of the water basic sanitation, hand washing and the like. We went to a hospital when we visited Guatemala, and another club in Guatemala worked with that hospital in teaching the residents proper sanitary washing and hygiene. Very simple, very basic, almost first grade type, but was very popular, very successful, and again, a tremendous improvement to the project. The Kyrgyzstan Medical Access Project I want to discuss briefly because that, as I said, included a VTT component. In addition to providing better medical access in Kyrgyzstan, a group went over to provide a training component. These were two different global grants, both sponsored by our district. The reason it's significant is there became reporting requirements from the VTT. The medical access portion of the global grant filed its final report on time, but the VTT team did not. And Rotary International sets the times for the preliminary reports and sets the times for the final reports. And if a project does not meet those times, then Mary Beth is informed of the deficiency, and she lets me know, and we have to get to work and find out why the report hasn't been done and make sure that it does get done, because if there is a sufficient delinquency in the reporting, that can cut off the district from any future global grants until you've become current in all your reporting requirements. So Mary Beth and I take this very seriously, and in the VTT component, they were able to file the report, and that final report has been accepted and the project is closed. The Guatemala $100,000 water system I want to talk about, because that is the project that we tried to involve, we did involve other clubs within the district. And Rick Debe deserves a ton of credit for all the work that he did. Many of you may have been at meetings where he came and asked for support of this project. And my understanding, and I didn't confirm this with him, but there were at least 8 clubs that contributed a total of $40,500 to this $100,000 project. So that's $60,000 that was derived from contributions within our district by clubs within our district, in addition to the $15,000 DDF that was matched by 100%. So this is a very important way for clubs to be able to be involved in a good global grant project. The problem is that it took a lot of time. And Rick visited, I don't know how many clubs. He had a chart, at least 25 or 30. They were good visits, and the clubs, the visits were well received. But I would like to see a way that you clubs out there who would like to get involved could go on the district website and find a project and express your interest, and make it a little bit easier for us to generate the $2,500 to $3,000 contributions that many clubs, that's the maximum that they can afford. So that's one of my goals as committee chair, to be able to augment that part of our district's global grant funding. Finally, I thought the Haiti microloan project is an interesting example. I referred to it earlier, and at last year's seminar, those of you who were there as well, I actually said that I personally had some reservations about a project in Haiti because of the civil unrest. But I went on to say that that is not our district committee's concern. Our district committee's concern is, does the project meet the requirements for a global grant? And does it have the funding to be able to go forward, and is it sustainable? And this project was a very good microloan project, and they had a good within Haiti source for managing the microloan. So it was only the civil unrest that had caused me some concerns. They did have a problem with, this was the project where the community needs assessment had been done 2 years ago, or 2 years prior to making the application, and they had to go back and do another community needs assessment in order to satisfy Rotary International. They finally did that. It's also the project where we, as a committee, approved it contingent upon their being able to raise the $10,000 that they needed from other clubs, or $9,000 from other clubs it was. And in fact, they needed a little bit more time to do that, but they put that together, and the project was approved by Rotary International. Now, looking at the unrest in Haiti, that still played a role. This was a project that was approved last fiscal year, but the funds were not distributed by June 30th because of that unrest. The funds have been distributed, and I'm told that by February, 45 loans had been made, and the project is off and running and will be successful. So there's a really good example of our committee does not really get involved with the evaluation of the engineering aspects or the financial aspects of the project. We let Rotary International do that. We're kind of a screen for Rotary International to make sure that the projects are within the areas of focus and within the basic guidelines for a global grant project. So I'm a little bit early here, and that gives me time, if I may, Don. Oh, no, I do have some more here. Okay. Coming developments. This was on last year's as well, and it is a part, frankly, of our strategic plan. Rotary International wants us to do assessment of outcomes and impact for the projects for which DDF and Rotary funds have been used. And Jeff's strategic plan for our district for this year, it was the only action item that was presented for our committee to develop a method for assessment of outcomes and impact, and then ultimately implement that method. And we have done that through Engineers Without Borders in Guatemala. They are doing a overall assessment. We've learned that the cost of the assessment is about $900, and that probably in the future should be factored into the project budget. But then we're hopeful that that will give us a format to be able to use for the other similar types of projects, water sanitation wash projects, for their evaluation of assessing outcomes and impact. It's a little easier with the microloan one because there they can simply report on who received it and were the funds repaid. Another area that is coming into play right now is what's called stewardship oversight. And our district has had appointed a stewardship oversight chairperson whose name I cannot remember right now, but her job is to implement within the district the oversight, the stewardship oversight functions, and where they overlap with the Global Grant Committee, which is why I put it in this seminar, is I think that the assessment of outcomes and impact is a part of that stewardship oversight, because now not only will we know that there's sustainability, but we will know what the outcomes and impact of our various projects are. And then as we're getting toward the end here, I'll just briefly mention the COVID-19. You may have heard about it. Rotary has implemented a supposed to be fast track COVID-19 application to address concerns in other countries in the world in dealing with the COVID-19 crisis. The project that I would like to talk with you about is COVID-19 like. We're not calling it fast track COVID-19. We're not going to really deal with it right now, but Rotary is on top of the COVID-19 responses and trying to address them as well. And then finally, just to mention, there's something called the Actions of Scale Grants, which has just started this year. It's a $200,000 grant, or it's a $2 million grant for a really large project. It's my understanding that they pretty well know what that project will be for this year, but it's something on the horizon that I think we should just keep our eyes on. I don't think that District 6270, and I won't speak for 6220, will get involved in that, but it's nice to know what Rotary is doing. So that takes me then to the end of the presentation. Don, can I be permitted to just, or are there questions? I should do that first.
Yeah, we do have some questions.
Okay.
The simple one is there a sample of a completed PPIS that people could use as a guide that you have available?
Oh, sure. I've got the PPISs that have been used for each of the global grants for which DDF has been awarded. So send me an email and ask me for one, and I'll give it to you. A better question is there an example of a global grant application? And there too, I do have one or two or three, and I have one that I recently got. I've been kind of collecting them now because they are fairly complex, and they're a good thing to have if you're going to undertake the actual writing of the global grant application. So I'd be happy to share those with you as well.
Okay, there was a question about global grant guidelines requiring a need assessment, and is there guidance about what the global grant will cover and not pay for? And my understanding is yes, and that the grants.rotary.org is the great place to go for, because over on the right hand side of that page is a bunch of links with that information. Am I correct in saying that, John?
That's correct.
Okay, we've got just 2 minutes left. Two more questions. One, do you have an example of a successful inbound global grant project, essentially where a local club, somebody local to the United States is the host club and somebody outside of the United States is the international partner?
We have not engaged in any of those in District 6270 since I have been on the committee. I'm aware of projects that have been done in Washington, actually with the Vista Hermosa Club in Guatemala. Example, Don, that I used with you this morning is if, for example, somebody wanted to do something for the Indian reservations and maybe COVID related, we could be a host club and get another club from another country to be the sponsor club, and yes, put together a global grant application.
Okay, my Rotary experience, I've been in multiple Rotary districts. My Rotary district in Georgia, we had a literacy project where there was an Indian club that was the international sponsor. My Rotary district in Arizona, we had a water project on the Navajo Nation, and a Mexican club was also the international sponsor there. And then the last question that is, how do I find an international partner? Would I be correct in saying all of those sites that you listed as far as resources would be a good place to go?
Yes, and especially I don't have the slide in front of me right now, but the ones that global grant ideas would be good. And I really would like to beef up our district website to have people who have, you're talking about the international, you want to find a host club that you can reasonably.
No, they have a project ID. They have a project here in Wisconsin, and they want to find an international partner.
That's out of my experience, so
this is Steve. What you probably do is what all the other international district governors do is you talk to any district governor, you get all kinds of emails throughout the year of people looking to do international global grants. So they just send out blast emails to every district governor that they can throughout the world, and somebody will respond. And RI may have a connection site too.
Okay. Well, we've bumped up against the clock. So I want to thank John and Steve for being our presenters today. I want to thank everybody that attended. We did top out at 102 Rotarians attending this webinar. That's a very fantastic sign that we want to be moving forward as far as doing good in our communities, and that the doors of opportunity